The night was heavy, drenched in the low hum of neon buzzing against the dark sky. Outside a weathered bar on the edge of a small town, a red sign flickered, casting shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. The muffled roar of laughter and the clink of glasses bled through the wooden walls, carrying with it the restless energy of men too eager to forget their own problems. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, cigarettes, and the faint trace of cheap cologne. At the far end of the counter, a man sat alone. His name was Daniel. His hair was graying, cut short in the style of someone who had once lived by order and discipline. His jacket was old, its patches worn and frayed, and his hands trembled slightly as he held onto a chipped mug of black coffee. He didn't belong here, not really. He wasn't here to laugh, or to brag, or to chase the night. He was here simply to sit in silence, to numb the quiet storm that lived inside him. Once he had been something else. A soldier. A protector. A man who carried both honor and responsibility into places most people would never dare to step. But wars end, even if the echoes never do. Daniel had returned home with invisible scars. His gait carried a limp, his eyes carried shadows, and his nights carried memories that refused to let him sleep. But none of that mattered to the younger crowd that filled the bar tonight. To them, he was nothing more than a fragile silhouette of a man long past his prime. They noticed his trembling hand as he lifted the cup to his lips. They noticed the way he avoided eye contact, as though he had nothing left to prove. And in their drunken boldness, they saw him not as a man, but as an easy target. The laughter grew sharper. A group of rowdy men at a corner table leaned forward, their voices cutting across the bar. One of them mimicked the way Daniel's hand shook. Another dragged his foot along the floor in a mocking limp. "Look at Grandpa over there," one of them jeered, his tone dripping with cruelty. Bet he never fought for anything but a discount. The bar erupted in laughter, but Daniel didn't flinch. He lowered his eyes, choosing dignity over reaction. He had faced worse, much worse. And yet, even so, the words cut deeper than he let on. The mockery escalated. They called him washed up, worthless. A man who probably made up his stories. The insults dripped like poison into the air. And the patrons who weren't laughing chose silence, too afraid or too unwilling to intervene. It was easier to laugh than to confront cruelty. Easier to turn away than to stand beside the man at the counter. But Daniel heard every word. His chest rose with a silent ache, his fists clenching under the counter where no one could see. The memories of the battlefield, the screams, the losses, the sacrifices, burned behind his eyes. And yet here he was, mocked by those who knew nothing of it. One of the rowdy men stood up, emboldened by the chorus of laughter around him. He swaggered across the floor, the sound of his boots echoing in the suddenly tense room. He stopped beside Daniel, leaning close enough that the smell of whiskey radiated off his breath. "Ah, come on, old man," he sneered, his words sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Prove it. Prove you were ever a real man." The shove came suddenly. A sharp push against Daniel's shoulder, not enough to knock him down, but enough to spark humiliation. The bar went quiet, anticipation flooding the air. Everyone watched, waiting for the old veteran to crumble. But Daniel did not fall. Slowly, he set his mug down on the counter with deliberate care. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something else, something heavier. He pushed himself up from the stool, his body stiff, his frame shaking not from weakness, but from the weight of years carried on his back. Every eye in the room followed him as he stood. The men who mocked him smirked, convinced they had won. The silence was broken only by the low hum of the neon lights outside and the distant crack of pool balls clashing in the background. Daniel looked at the man who had shoved him, then at the others who watched with mocking smiles. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for the buttons of his shirt. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if each button carried the burden of a memory long buried. The laughter began again, nervous this time, tinged with curiosity. "What's he doing?" one voice whispered. "Trying to scare us with his wrinkled chest?" But Daniel kept going, his silence unshakable. He opened the shirt, one button at a time, until finally he pulled the fabric aside, and then everything stopped. The bar froze in stunned silence. The laughter died mid-breath, choked back into nothingness. All eyes locked on the dark ink etched across Daniel's chest, a tattoo scarred and weathered with age, but unmistakable in its meaning. The camera lingers. The room holds its breath. What they saw was no ordinary tattoo, but what it meant, that would shock them all. The bar was silent, eerily silent. A moment ago it had been filled with drunken laughter and the sharp edge of mockery, but now every breath, every heartbeat seemed to hang in the air. Daniel's shirt hung open, and beneath the dim yellow glow of the bar lights, the tattoo on his chest stood like a ghost from another world. It wasn't just ink. It was a story carved into flesh, a story only a few in this world could ever truly understand. The emblem was old, faded by time and weather, but unmistakable to those who knew. A battle insignia earned only by the rare few who had walked through fire and returned scarred but unbroken. It marked Daniel not as a man to be ridiculed, but as a man who had faced death head-on and carried the memory of brothers who never came home. For a long moment, no one moved. The rowdy men who had jeered at him now sat frozen, their smirks gone, replaced by a creeping unease. Whispers slithered through the crowd. Someone near the back spoke softly, almost reverently. "Wait, isn't that—" But the words trailed off, drowned in the weight of realization. Then, from the far corner, movement. A young man, quiet until now, rose slowly from his chair. His eyes had locked on the tattoo the second Daniel revealed it, and his face had gone pale. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, as though drawn by something far stronger than curiosity. The crowd watched, holding its collective breath, as the young man stopped just a few feet away from Daniel. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "That symbol? That's the 41st Recon Unit, isn't it?" Daniel's eyes lifted, meeting the young man's. A flicker of pain, pride, and something unspoken passed between them. The veteran gave a single, heavy nod. The bar murmured again. Most had never even heard of the 41st. To them it was just numbers and mystery. But to those who knew, those who had family who served, the name carried weight. It was a unit known for missions few returned from. A unit forged in fire, where loyalty meant life or death. The young man swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he continued. My father was with the 41st. He told me stories when I was a kid, stories I thought were just too impossible to be real. Missions behind enemy lines, nights so dark they couldn't even see their own hands. He always said there was one man who saved them all when the unit was cornered. A man who carried him out after he was hit. He said that man vanished after the war. I never thought I'd meet him. A hush fell even deeper over the room. The young man's eyes glistened with tears as he looked at Daniel, his voice lowering almost to a whisper. Sir, you saved my father's life. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. For years, he had carried the memories of that night, the chaos, the gunfire, the unbearable weight of dragging a wounded comrade through mud and fire. He had buried those memories under silence, never speaking of them. And now, here stood the son of the man whose life he had once carried on his shoulders. The transformation in the bar was immediate. The men who had mocked him shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces flushed with shame. Their cruel laughter now seemed hollow, pathetic in the face of the truth. They lowered their eyes, suddenly unable to meet Daniel's. The young man stepped closer, reaching out with a trembling hand. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but then, slowly, he extended his own. Their hands met, not in weakness, but in gratitude and respect. The young man clasped it firmly, his voice steady now. Thank you. My father wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't even be here if not for you. And in that instant, the weight of ridicule that had pressed down on Daniel for years began to lift. His eyes glistened, not from shame, but from finally being seen. The silence of the bar wasn't cold anymore. It was reverent. Around the room, heads bowed slightly. Some patrons murmured quiet words of apology. Others simply watched, humbled, unsure of what to say. Even the rowdy men who had started it all looked broken, their arrogance stripped bare. One of them muttered, almost to himself, We didn't know. We didn't know. But ignorance was no excuse. The truth had been revealed, and the laughter that once filled the room could never return in the same way again. For Daniel, it wasn't about glory. It wasn't about finally proving his worth to strangers. It was about dignity. About knowing that the sacrifices of the past still meant something, that the ghosts of his fallen brothers weren't forgotten. The young man held his hand tightly, as though refusing to let go of the living link to the father who had once told him bedtime stories of courage and survival. Daniel looked around the room one last time. The faces that once mocked him now showed only respect, and perhaps regret. But what mattered most was the quiet understanding now hanging in the air. Respect is not measured by age or strength or the absence of scars. It is measured by sacrifice. Daniel's shoulders straightened. For the first time in years, he felt the weight he carried grow lighter, not because it was gone, but because it was finally recognized. The bar had begun with laughter. It ended with silence, a silence more powerful than any jeer. A silence that spoke of honor, sacrifice, and the hidden battles men carry in silence. And yet, as Daniel buttoned his shirt back up, something lingered in the air, an unspoken question of what this moment meant not only for him, but for everyone watching. Because what happened that night in the bar would stay with each of them forever. What would you have done if you were in that bar? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your reflections on respect and kindness. And so, in that quiet bar, respect replaced ridicule. And silence spoke louder than laughter ever could. Daniel didn't need to prove his worth. His life had already done that for him. If you believe every act of sacrifice deserves recognition, and that kindness is stronger than cruelty, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of dignity and respect.